Hi, Joe Volpe, the publisher of Corriere Canadese, North America's only Italian language daily newspaper, here for Law and Reality on Immigration on behalf of Go Live TV and Corcan Media Group with noted and notable Richard Borak,
Sir.
immigration lawyer. You've been around a long time in immigration.
Too long, Joe, too long.
Well, you know what? We've been following over the course of
Yeah.
this week the immigration patterns in Canada. You can get all this data on Stats Canada sites, on
Sure,
CIC
sure.
site. And one of the things, I've got to tell you this, one of the things that happened is today, this week's or last week's Wednesday edition.
I read it.
Well, that edition on Facebook was viewed by over 7,000 people.
And why is that, Joe?
Well, it's one of those topics, immigration, where we've broken down the numbers for everybody. I don't know whether you can catch a shot of this over on that screen there. You can see what we've done is we've taken a look at the numbers, we've put them down in graphics form, and we've given everybody an indication of what the origin is of all of the immigrants. It appeared, because we're an Italian paper, that Italians are no longer welcome in Canada.
Sure.
And we said it.
That's right.
Okay, so but you have a different experience. Your experience, the discussion we've been having, is about the role of language testing in immigration.
And Joe, and that's when I read the article yesterday. That's what prompted me to be here today. You said express entry, the government's administrative program that controls economic immigration into this country. You cannot get into that process until you write a certified language exam.
Well, what's wrong with that?
Absolutely. Well, I'll tell you it's good news and bad news. It's from day one, under the law in Canada and the tradition and all the years I've been there, every economic immigrant who came to Canada had his language skills assessed.
So you know, let me play the devil's advocate, because
Okay.
I feel
You're the devil.
I feel like that today, honestly. Like,
Yeah.
when I hear you talking to me like that, you're telling me that when my dad came over,
That's right.
they tested him in English.
What they did was they were common sense and economically realistic. Your dad, my dad, they sat down in front of an immigration officer, and they could either show what tests, what exams, what ability they had, or else the immigration officer would just sit there, which the law requires an immigration officer to do, and when there's any reasonable doubt, to sit there and hear the language and assess for himself if your dad
Well, what's the
and my
purpose
dad.
of that? You know, my dad came over here. He was a national security agent, okay, the equivalent of the RCMP. He didn't speak English. He ended up working as a plasterer. I wish he'd have continued. He'd been a multi-gazillionaire by now.
Yeah.
And then went on to work in a factory. He didn't need
But-
language skills
Well,
to do that.
I'm sorry, Joe. Everybody, whether he needs the skills or doesn't need the skills, I agree, and the law says, and tradition acknowledges, that the officer would have to look at the person or assess on paper whether that person would be economically successfully established in Canada. And that's reasonable. We don't need too much welfare. We don't need too much public assistance.
So when my dad came here, when your dad came here, there was no such thing as welfare.
Well, but times have changed. But let's get back to the language. So what they've done, and my question for you is, why did they go from a common, because the law hasn't changed, by the way. The law still
Well,
says...
yes, it has, but we'll get down to that in a minute.
Oh, well, no. The politics have changed, which I got to ask you about.
Okay, you can do
But
that.
that's your fault, not the law's fault. the law said and says that you got to go one by one and assess the new dads and the new workers. Do they have the English skills to comply, to survive? And it worked common sense until when?
Well, I don't know. When my dad came here, there was about...
Fernando, give us Lester Pearson.
Well, you
When
you
you're-
mentioned Lester Pearson. So my dad came here under Lester Pearson.
That's
No,
right.
he wasn't there yet. My dad came here before Lester Pearson.
The Diefenbaker?
Even before that.
Oh, really?
He was
Saint
under
Laurent?
Saint Laurent. He came here in 51.
Yeah. I give it 50.
Okay, there you go.
Okay. So when Pearson was there,
But there were 200, I think in that year there was 260,000 or some numbers like that.
when Pearson was there, The year he left, he had immigration with no computers, no officers, population of 18 million. He had immigration steady at 280,000 a year. There was no formal language test. There was no language testing, and the country were getting built. And then what happened? Give us Pierre Trudeau, Fernando. And this is where you come in, Joe, because
me?
yeah, because you worked with these guys. And
Yes.
what happened, starting with Trudeau, immigration stopped being, and I'll go that far, stopped being essentially an economic demographic vehicle for this country and became a cultural, political game largely founded on language, the politics of language,
You mean language police?
language police.
Okay, so listen, you want to, let me
Well,
preempt you for a second.
You were there. Remember, as the lawyer, I just deal with simple people and simple laws. The politics with the language screwed it up.
Okay,
Your
you know,
fault.
But you can't blame me for something that I disagreed with, okay? And you're right, I was there. But I was there already as a student, and I recall the problems in the late 60s, early 70s with the FLQ and the other terrorist groups in Canada that were trying to subvert the nation, the drug dealers that were rampant they were running rampant in British Columbia, and the imposition of the War Measures Act under Pierre Trudeau.
Yep.
Pierre Trudeau, great liberal, he imposed that legislation in order to first to clean up the drug dealers, the bikers, move them out of the way. But what happened in the process is immigration got trampled. There, I agree with you.
See, we go back to 74. Quebec, for the first time, the Bill 22, Bourassa, they started talking about worrying that the French language was under attack.
But they were worried about that before that when they
For
put
500
forward
years.
that- well, yes, but but they had the Laurendeau Commission travel around the country to see how they were going to get linguistic duality.
But what Trudeau did, and this is the question for you, did Trudeau take that Quebec fear of being assimilated and of being culturally and linguistically destroyed? Is that why he drove immigration from Pearson's 250,000 down to 80,000 a year? The great Pierre Elliott Trudeau, friend of the immigrants, drove immigration down to 80,000 from 250 because I submit to you that he was scared that the English language and English culture would swamp the Francophones, and therefore he institutionalized the idea of quotas. We never had we had targets, immigration targets, but we never had quotas.
Or at least not quotas based on language skills,
Or
language
culture,
ability,
whatever.
or French language or
That's
English
right.
language.
And so what it appears to have happened is with Trudeau, and you were there, with Trudeau,
You're making me older than I am. I was in university
well,
at the time.
you were a young lad at the time, okay? So then Trudeau started the game. And then, Fernando, give us Brian Mulroney.
Now, there's an old friend.
Yeah, well, there's a good Tory. Good man. Okay.
Well, listen, this is a little bit of an aside, but, I had an adversary of Brian Mulroney,
Yeah.
but I think I may have told you this. There's a couple of reasons why I never say anything really negative about it. Really negative? I say negative things, but they're political and they're partisan, but they're never personal. But now that you've mentioned him, and this is where we're not going to get into a partisan political debate. It's all about immigration. And it's all about the problems that have surfaced as a result of the 70s. And, language was so important. And now I'm going to take it out on you as a lawyer.
Sure.
The lawyers never stepped up to the plate and said, this stuff is nonsense from a legal point of view. They want to stop the FLQ. Hold on. They want to stop the FLQ. They want to stop the separatist movement in Quebec. And so what happened is you establish linguistic obstacles or fractioning reasons so that you can get people here who are going to reinforce the Francophone demographic. Nothing wrong with that, but to the detriment of everybody else.
Let's stay with the language. In fact, Rocco Galati and I, we did go to federal court.
Now, Rocco Galati is a constitutional expert.
We went to federal on the language issue. why is Ottawa, especially for trades workers, why are they allowing there to be 1 million undocumented workers in this country? Why are they discriminating against Portuguese, Italian, Poles, and others, essentially on linguistic issues, when it's totally unnecessary in a place like Ontario and the GTHA and our economy?
So we've had this discussion before about the fact that you don't need to speak to a French nail with an English hammer. You just need to know where to put it.
And Brian Mulroney, what did he do because of Meech Lake?
All right, so Meech Lake was a consequence of an evolution of a whole series of problems related to trying to maintain unity in the country. And so you had a second referendum. We were going to have a second referendum. There had been a referendum in 1980, and the Charter of Rights, etc. I don't want to diminish it, but there was serious concern that the Francophone community just was not going to support a Canada based on linguistic duality. Meech Lake was an attempt by Mulroney's administration to bring harmony into that environment. And what essentially he did is he said, okay, on the question of immigration, just to keep Francophone Canada, i.e. Quebec, happy, we'll give them the authority. Remember that there's a combined administrative sharing of a jurisdiction between the provinces. Constitutional. And he said, tell you what, you can determine 25% of the population of immigrants. And so if your priority is to have them all to be Francophone, if you don't bring in, let's say the target is 100,000, you don't bring in 25, the rest of the country doesn't get the other 75.
Do you think, is anything wrong with that?
Well, I think that there's something wrong with that. I was wrong. I thought it was wrong then, and I think it's wrong today.
But if Quebec wants to defend its linguistic situation through bringing in Francophone immigrants, is anything wrong with that?
Look, the only thing that does, and I know you disagree with me on this, once somebody comes in here, they come into this country for an economic, our title was, is it an economic necessity or a linguistic necessity? You open your doors to somebody else because they're going to increase the wealth of your environment.
Sure.
That's why you bring them in. If they integrate more or less easily, depending on their language ability, that's their problem and their benefit. It's not yours. If you want to make it your benefit, you put some money out to make it work better or easier. It's called a school system. I came here, I didn't speak English.
Neither did I.
Okay, so what happens? You establish a social program to allow them to integrate. That's still the school system.
Okay,
Their job is the other integrating system.
Let's get down to hardcore reality. When you were minister, you can talk about it. Did you see a trend developing that because Quebec was driving a linguistic agenda, that they were forcing a linguistic English agenda on the rest of Canada through immigration?
Well, I don't want to engage in revisionist history by talking about when I was there, so to speak, or when we were there, so to speak again. But there was always this tendency to try to develop a cultural environment where, the poor immigrant doesn't know what's going on. We've got to teach him English before he comes here, otherwise he can't integrate. So
People bought that?
I never bought it. I told I used to tell my department, please stop giving me this nonsense. My dad didn't speak English. My mother didn't speak English till the day she died. I couldn't afford to buy their house.
Were there any studies that these officials had to back up their nonsense on language?
Well, I say it's nonsense. Okay, I say it's nonsense. So I'm being the bad guy.
Well, they're positioned.
Well, I mean, you're the lawyer who defended all of these kinds
And
of
I can
positions.
tell you, those studies do not exist for the trades workers.
Well, they don't
and
exist
the
for
federal
anybody.
government, the federal government had the nerve in court. They lied. They said they have studies to show that trades workers cannot become economically successfully established in Canada unless they can pass the English exam.
Okay, so you know what?
Did you ever see those reports?
No, what I used to say, and I still say it today, if you've got them, produce them. Number one. Number two, everybody who uses those tests, those IELTS TS tests as a standard. Better write the test here before
Okay.
me, otherwise you get
Now,
out of the department.
So we've done a bit of a history lesson today.
Well, no, it's not a history lesson. You asked me
It's a
about what I'm
policy.
coming to.
It's a policy
It's a
call.
policy call.
Now,
And every policy call is worth what the debate brings to it. So you want to bring facts, you want to bring the law
Yeah,
and
yeah.
the reality. For me, the reality is, if it's policy, tell me when we had that debate. And we're not having a debate on what I see today. You want to defend that.
what I want to get right down to, Fernando, can you put the IELTS? Now, see, Joe, this is reality. The law says that every individual worker has to have his language assessed. That's the law. This is hardcore reality, that nobody can apply for express entry unless they succeed with this exam. And I'm asking, does a one size covers all exam, does that serve the country?
No, if you're going to ask me to agree with you, I'd say no. I told you I was going to be the devil's advocate today.
No, put
That's
it back up,
nonsense.
Fernando, put it back up. I think our viewers around the world, before they come to Canada, they should see that if they do not succeed with this exam, and it's a toughie, and they want to stay in this country, probably they're going to wind up being undocumented.
Okay, well, I'm going to tell you something. Richard, I hope you don't disagree with me too much because, you can disagree with me all day. I'm hard-headed. So here I am, former cabinet minister, member of parliament, a guy who's got a string of university degrees, to his background. I'm publishing. What kind of language paper is this?
Portuguese?
It could be, but it happens to be Italian.
Yeah.
So what happens? Anybody who comes over here as an Italian already has something that allows him to integrate himself in this community. You tell me what the function of a language test is, other than to keep that guy out.
Well, not that exam, that test, and I hope a lot of our viewers will download it. Our Canadian viewers, a lot of them would fail that exam. The others,
Some of my former department officials would have failed.
absolutely. Now, that exam represents the political, cultural, and country bias priority of our agenda, non-economic driven immigration policies. Now, I've talked to linguistic experts, and they keep telling me year after year that they complain about the comma.
Oh, I remember that.
No, hold on. And I say, what are you talking about? And they say, the people who come from British background countries working on a separate set of books, textbooks, they learn English a certain way. And where they place their commas is symbolic of that language ability to write an exam, which gets us back to what you wrote about no room for Italians. Italians, Poles, people from those cultures, East and South, non-British European cultures, the French. They
have a different grammatical
That's
context.
right. And that comma symbolizes that. And the people who wrote that exam, I don't blame the British Council. That's their job. But for Canada Immigration to demand that a bricklayer and a carpenter or any immigrant who speaks well, focuses on a grammatical and punctuation-based environment, then we're running a quota system.
Look, you're surprised about the comma business. So I'm old enough to be able to tell you this, so don't feel offended. I went through the old Ontario Grade 13 format where you used to have to write a qualifying exam in February to write the final exam in June. And when you were writing on English, or in fact on any English-based test, if you've got 4 major grammatical errors, you failed the exam. Didn't matter how bright you were and everything else.
Like IELTS.
Oh, well, hold on. If you committed a comma splice, I had to chuckle when you were talking about commas. a comma splice, or you put a comma in the wrong place. That's a major error. You did that 4 times on a 3-hour exam. You're dead in the water. You couldn't go to university.
And these guys are going to be deported.
Well, you know,
they're
like, I mean,
gone. They're history.
Well, so the responsibility, I'm going to lay this on your shoulders. I
Okay.
said I was going to play the
Okay.
devil's advocate.
Okay.
That's the reason why I didn't like this nonsense. And that's why, for example, on my newspaper, our newspaper, says you can integrate people in their own language in this environment because your need is an economic need. It's not a linguistic need.
Yeah.
What the heck does it matter that if somebody who's putting in a pipe and doing the appropriate plumbing procedures understands how to do it
That-
right,
Joe,
but he doesn't understand how to pass a grade 13 English exam or a current IELTS exam?
But that was a situation when you were minister, didn't? What was your reaction?
Who was applying to come to Canada?
Ah, okay.
My big issue at the time was go out there and recruit people we want. Otherwise, you're going to have to take whoever's
you're right.
who will come here, and not only come here if they can't go someplace else.
So what is the logic up there? If they've got 1 million undocumented guys building subways, etc.
Oh, you're just tempting me now because I think
No. And they got to worry about commas. Like what are they smoking up there in Ottawa?
Well, so here we were going to have an academic discussion
Yeah,
about
sorry,
this, and then
I get
suddenly
carried
you
away.
got into that, and you've now put me in a position where I'd say, you know what, you, the lawyer, and your cohort group, if you're not out there fighting every single day against government insanity, because that's all it is, that they are allowing 1 million undocumented workers who are fully integrated from an economic environment in this country, in this province, there's over 500,000 of them. There's something wrong with this system. If the only attention that the minister and his government can say is, we got to put more money so that people can understand how to function in a particular language, whether it's English or French. Are you serious?
You tell me.
No, there's 7.7 million people in this country who operate in a language that's neither English nor French. And
So deport them all.
oh no, that's insane. That's insane. We're at the end of our program. I'm sorry.
I
So
think I'm losing it on this one.
Joe Volpe, publisher of the Corriere Canadese, a non-English, non-French newspaper, on behalf of Go Live TV, which is essentially a Portuguese-based media network, and Corcan Media Group, which is a multilingual media group, with Richard Borax, who I think speaks Polish,
A little bit.
has gone to school all of his life here in Canada.
Didn't speak a word of English.
And, now he's a famous lawyer. And me, I'm just a humble servant of the public. Inviting you to join us once again, signing off for Law and Reality in Immigration, and speaking on behalf of sanity instead of what's going on. See you next time.